In every cold case, the evidence sits and waits. A faded photograph, a cryptic note, a single strand of hair. These clues are locked away, sometimes for decades, waiting for a new key, a fresh perspective. Welcome to the Evidence Locker. I'm your host, Shay. Each week, we unlock a new file, examining the artifacts of an unsolved case. We'll piece together the timeline, explore the theories, and focus on the one piece of evidence that could hold the key, if only we could see it in the right light. This week, we open the file on Tiffany Sessions, a 20-year-old college student who vanished during an evening power walk in Gainesville, Florida. The case went cold for 25 years, frustrating a generation of detectives. But the most crucial piece of evidence wasn't found at a crime scene. It was discovered after the prime suspect was already dead, hidden in plain sight on a single page of his personal diary. Let's open the locker. Before she became a name on a missing person poster, before her face was broadcast on national news, Tiffany Sessions was a force of nature. To understand the void she left behind, you first have to understand the brilliant light that she cast. The year was 1989. Gainesville, Florida was a bustling, sun-drenched college town, home to the University of Florida Gators. It was a place of youthful energy, ambition, and the feeling that anything was possible. And at the heart of that world was 20-year-old Tiffany Louise Sessions. Her mother, Hillary, remembers her as a young woman with an infectious energy who could light up a room. Friends described her as incredibly determined, someone who set a goal and simply would not stop until she achieved it. That determination was clear in her academic life. She was a driven business major at the University of Florida with clear-eyed ambitions. The plan was to graduate and join her father, Pat Sessions, a prominent real estate developer in the family business. She wasn't just dreaming, she was building her future, class by class. Tiffany had grown up in the affluent community of Coconut Grove, Miami. She was the only child of Pat and Hillary, and her upbringing was one of privilege, yes, but also one of immense love and expectation. She was close with her parents, speaking to them on the phone almost daily from her off-campus apartment at the Casa Blanca West Condominiums, a sprawling complex popular with students. That drive and discipline extended beyond the classroom. Tiffany was deeply into fitness. In the late 80s, power walking was a national craze, and for Tiffany, it was a daily ritual. It was her way to de-stress, to clear her head after a long day of classes, and to stay in shape. Almost every evening, like clockwork, she would change into her workout clothes, clip her Sony Walkman to her waistband, put on her headphones, and head out the door of her apartment. Her route was a familiar one. A loop that took her west along a bike path on Southwest 35th Place. It was a route she had taken hundreds of times. It was routine. It was normal. It felt safe. She was smart and aware of her surroundings. Her father had made sure of that. Pat had given her a Rolex watch not just as a status symbol, but as a safety measure, something valuable she could give a mugger if she ever found herself in trouble. She wore it on every walk. To her roommate, Kathleen, and to her friends, this was just part of who Tiffany was. It was Tiffany's time. On Thursday, February 9th, 1989, Tiffany finished her classes and returned to her apartment. She spoke with her mother on the phone, a perfectly normal conversation. She told her she was heading out for her walk and would call her back later that night. She changed into a pair of red sweatpants and a long-sleeved white shirt with the word Aspen emblazoned across the front. She slipped on her sneakers, strapped on her Rolex, and grabbed her Walkman. At 6 p.m., she left her apartment and set off on her walk, vanishing into the warm Florida twilight. To everyone who knew her, it was just another Thursday. It was just another walk. No one could have known that this time, Tiffany wouldn't be coming back. 6 o'clock became 7 o'clock. Inside Casablanca West apartment number 2205, Tiffany's roommate, Kathleen, was starting her evening. At first, there was no cause for concern. Tiffany's power walks were usually about an hour, maybe 90 minutes at most. Perhaps she'd run into a friend on the path or decided to take an extra lap. The sun had set and the darkness deepened outside her window. By 8 o'clock, the casual sense of waiting began to curdle into worry. 2 hours had passed. This was unusual. Tiffany was a creature of habit, disciplined and reliable. She had also promised to call her mother back. Kathleen started to make phone calls to Tiffany's friends. "Have you seen Tiffany? Have you heard from her?" The answer again and again was no. No one had seen Tiffany. By 9 o'clock, the worry had turned to genuine fear. Kathleen made the call that every parent dreads receiving. 300 miles south, in their home in Coconut Grove, the phone rang. It was Kathleen, her voice tight with anxiety. She explained that Tiffany had gone for her walk hours ago and hadn't returned. For Pat and Hillary Sessions, the world stopped. Their daughter. She would never just disappear. She would never fail to call. They peppered Kathleen with questions. Had she checked the apartment? Was her car still there? Yes, Kathleen told them. Her gray Mazda was sitting in the parking lot. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Within minutes, Pat and Hillary were in their car, embarking on a frantic 5-hour drive north to Gainesville through the dead of night. They called the police on their way, their voices desperate, urging them to go to the apartment immediately. When law enforcement arrived at the apartment complex, they were met with a scene that was chillingly pristine. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing was out of place. But the items Tiffany had left behind told a terrifying story. Her wallet was on the counter. Her driver's license was inside. Her keys were there. Without her keys, she couldn't get back into the apartment. Without her ID and money, where could she have gone? It was the definitive proof that Tiffany had not planned to be gone for long. She had intended to come back. The police began to piece together a timeline. She was last seen at 6 o'clock, heading west on the bike path along Southwest 35th Place. She was wearing her distinctive Aspen sweatshirt, red sweatpants, and her Rolex. Her Sony Walkman was clipped to her waist. The Walkman and Rolex were the only two significant items she had on her person. Investigators noted this immediately. If this was a robbery, those were the two things a mugger would take. But there was no evidence of a robbery. No signs of a struggle on the path. No witnesses who heard a scream. Just nothing. By the time Pat and Hillary Sessions pulled into Gainesville in the early morning hours of February 10th, a full-scale police investigation was underway. The sun rose on a city gripped by fear and a family consumed by a nightmare. Their 20-year-old daughter, a young woman with a bright and meticulously planned future, had walked out her front door for a simple evening walk and had vanished into thin air. The search for Tiffany Sessions had begun. The morning of February 10th, 1989, broke over Gainesville with a chilling new reality. Tiffany Sessions was gone. What followed was one of the largest and most intensive search operations in Florida history. The Alachua County Sheriff's Office, aided by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, mobilized a massive force. But they weren't alone. Hundreds of University of Florida students, Tiffany's classmates and strangers alike, fanned out across the city, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. The initial search grid was enormous. It centered on the last place Tiffany was known to be, the paved bike path near her apartment. Search teams, some on foot, some on horseback, moved in meticulous lines, scouring every inch of the path and the dense woods that bordered it. They waded through murky retention ponds and crawled through thick underbrush, their eyes peeled for any sign of a struggle, any piece of discarded clothing, any clue at all. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their crews scanning the landscape for a flash of red from Tiffany's sweatpants, or a glint of steel from her Rolex. But the landscape gave up nothing. The central, maddening question hung over the entire operation. How does a person simply vanish from a well-traveled path in the early evening? Investigators were baffled by the complete and total lack of physical evidence. There was no crime scene, no blood, no torn clothing, no scuff marks on the pavement. The two items that would have been obvious targets in a robbery, her Sony Walkman and her Rolex watch, were also gone. But if she'd been robbed, where was she? If she'd been attacked, wouldn't someone have heard something? Days turned into a week, and the physical evidence locker for the Tiffany Sessions case remained hauntingly empty. It was as if she had become a ghost. Police were flooded with thousands of tips, but each one led to a frustrating dead end. They had a victim, they had a time, and they had a place, but they had no crime scene, no witnesses, and no suspect. And then, just as the trail seemed to be growing impossibly cold, came a sudden, shocking break, or so it seemed. A local construction worker, named Michael Christopher Knickerbocker, was brought in for questioning. He was already a person of interest in the unrelated disappearance of a gas station attendant. Under interrogation, Knickerbocker told a story that made detectives' blood run cold. He claimed that on the evening of February 9th, he had been driving his work truck when he accidentally struck and killed Tiffany as she walked along the road. In a panic, he said, he put her body in his truck, drove to a remote, wooded area near the Alachua-Gilchrist County line, and buried her in a shallow grave. For the Sessions family, and for the exhausted investigators, this was a gut-wrenching but tangible lead. It was a horrible answer, but it was an answer. Police took Knickerbocker out to the area he described, a vast expanse of Florida wilderness. They were ready to bring Tiffany home. But once there, Knickerbocker's story began to fall apart. He couldn't pinpoint the location. He led them from one spot to another, his story shifting with every question. The details he gave about the accident didn't align with the known facts. After an extensive search of the area turned up nothing, investigators came to a sickening realization. Michael Knickerbocker was lying. He had fabricated the entire confession. Why? Well, most likely because he believed that confessing to an accidental death would get him a more lenient deal for the other crimes he was being investigated for. He was using Tiffany's tragic disappearance as a bargaining chip. The Knickerbocker confession was a cruel detour, a false dawn that wasted precious time and inflicted immeasurable pain on the Sessions family. And with that, the most promising lead in the case evaporated. The thousands of tips slowed to a trickle. The massive search parties were scaled back. The media attention began to wane. The initial, frantic search for Tiffany Sessions was over. A new, quieter, and far more painful chapter was about to begin. The long, cold wait for an answer. After the cruel hoax of the Michael Knickerbocker confession, the loud, frantic noise of the initial search for Tiffany Sessions faded into a deafening silence. The news vans drove away, the student volunteers went back to class, the helicopters returned to their hangars. For the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, the case file didn't close, but it moved from the top of the desk to a shelf in the cold case unit. It grew thicker with each passing year, but not with leads, with dead ends. Over 4,000 tips were investigated. Hundreds of potential suspects were interviewed and cleared. The file became a thick, heavy volume of frustration. The one thing it lacked was a single piece of concrete evidence pointing in any direction. For the Sessions family, however, there was no shelf to put their grief on. Going back to their old life was impossible. Their new life, their new all-consuming purpose, was finding Tiffany. Pat and Hillary Sessions refused to let their daughter become just another forgotten face on a missing person file. They became a force of nature in their own right, transforming their personal tragedy into a national crusade. Pat, a successful and shrewd businessman, channeled all his resources and energy into the search. They established the Tiffany Sessions Conference for Missing Children and Child Safety, a foundation dedicated to providing resources and support for other families enduring the same nightmare. They became lobbyists, pushing for legislation to create a better coordinated response for missing adults. They were instrumental in the passage of the National Child Search Assistance Act of 1990, which required law enforcement agencies to immediately report missing children to the FBI's national database. They understood a painful truth. The system had failed them, and they were determined to fix it for the families that would tragically come after. They kept Tiffany's story alive in the media, appearing on shows like Unsolved Mysteries and The Oprah Winfrey Show. Hillary even wrote her own book, Where's My Tiffany? Her face, her story, was kept in the public consciousness, a constant reminder that she was still out there, somewhere. But behind the public advocacy was the private, unending pain of not knowing. 1 year turned to 5, 5 years turned to 10. Anniversaries and birthdays became agonizing markers of time stolen. Tiffany should have graduated college, been starting a career, getting married, and having children. Instead, she was frozen in time at age 20, forever power walking down a Gainesville bike path in a white aspen sweatshirt. The family offered a reward, which grew over the years to $250,000. They hired private investigators who chased down leads across the country and even overseas. Every promising tip led to the same brick wall. Every potential suspect was eventually cleared. For detectives, the case was a ghost that haunted their careers. The complete absence of evidence was almost supernatural. There were no witnesses, no forensic trail. It was a perfectly executed abduction, or a series of impossibly unfortunate events that left no trace. The case was cold, colder than cold. It was frozen solid. For more than 2 decades, the file on Tiffany Sessions sat on that shelf, a monument to a mystery with no solution. But it was waiting for a new set of eyes, a fresh look at old evidence, and a name that had been in the files all along, but had never been seen in the right light. The answer was not in Gainesville. It was hundreds of miles away, hidden in plain sight. 25 years, a quarter of a century. For Tiffany's family, it was a lifetime of waiting. For the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, the case file was a constant, nagging reminder of a puzzle that they couldn't solve. But time, while a thief of hope, can also be an ally to justice. In 2012, a major break occurred when cold case detectives, using new DNA technology, re-examined evidence from a different unsolved murder. The 1992 murder of 21-year-old Santa Fe college student Elizabeth Foster in Gainesville had also gone cold for decades, but new testing conclusively matched DNA evidence from her body to a man named Paul Eugene Rolls. With Rolls identified in one Gainesville murder, he instantly became a person of interest in the disappearance of Tiffany Sessions. Who was Paul Rolls? He was a convicted murderer with a dark and violent history. In 1976, he was sentenced to life in prison for the 1972 murder of a young woman named Linda Fida in Miami-Dade County. Despite the life sentence, Rolls was paroled in 1985. By April 1988, he had moved to Gainesville. When newly hired cold case detective Kevin Allen took over the Sessions investigation, he made Rolls his first priority. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. First, the timeline. In February 1989, when Tiffany disappeared, Paul Rolls was not only a murderer, he was a murderer who was there. Second, the location. This was the detail that had been overlooked for 25 years. At the time of Tiffany's disappearance, Paul Rolls worked for a construction company that was putting up scaffolding for a new development. That construction site was directly on the route Tiffany took for her daily walk. The site would have been a perfect observation post, a predator's blind. It provided the cover, the opportunity, and the isolation that he needed. Armed with this powerful circumstantial evidence, Detective Allen attempted to question Rolls, who was then in a prison hospital dying of lung cancer. However, when Allen arrived, it was too late. Paul Rolls was in a coma, breathing only with the aid of a ventilator. Allen left a picture of Tiffany by his hospital bed, in case he woke up. He never did. Paul Eugene Rolls died on February 13, 2013, taking any potential confession with him to the grave. While a deathbed confession was now impossible, the investigation was far from over. Rolls had left behind a box of his personal effects. After persuading Rolls' only friend to turn over the items, Detective Allen began to sift through them. Inside, he found a small red address book. It wasn't just an address book, it was a killer's ledger. Scattered among the names and numbers were a series of cryptic entries. Investigators recognized notes corresponding to two of his other known victims, Linda Fida, the woman he murdered in 1972, and a teenager he kidnapped and raped in 1994. With a sense of dread, Allen continued flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning for one specific year, 1989. And then he found it. Tucked away on a page was the entry that solidified the case. It read, Number 2, 2/9/89. The date was unmistakable, February 9th, 1989, the day Tiffany Sessions disappeared. Investigators believe the number 2 was Rolls' own brutal numbering system, marking Tiffany as his second murder victim. His murder of Linda Fida in 1972 was his first. This single, horrific entry became the linchpin of the investigation. It was the physical evidence that powerfully pointed to his guilt in the absence of a confession. While Tiffany's remains have never been found, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office considers the case solved. The official search for a suspect was over, but the family's search for Tiffany herself had just entered a new, painful chapter. While the Alachua County Sheriff's Office is confident that Paul Rolls was Tiffany's killer, her body has never been found. After more than 30 years, her family is still waiting for the one clue that will allow them to bring her home for a Christian burial. The evidence locker in her case is closed, but it is not permanently locked. Answers in cold cases often come from those who remember something small, something they thought was insignificant at the time. Paul Rolls likely had help burying his victims, and someone out there may still know where he left Tiffany Sessions. If you have any information, no matter how minor it seems, please contact the Alachua County Sheriff's Office at 352-955-1818. You can also remain anonymous by calling Crime Stoppers. Tiffany's case number is 8902-0050. A full transcript of this episode, along with photos and links to the official tip lines, can be found on our website at theevidencelockerpod.com. Thank you for listening. Join us next time as we unlock another case file here at the Evidence Locker.